People say that the US dollar isn't backed by anything, but that's not quite right. It's not backed by gold anymore, but it's also not backed by just good vibes alone either. Behind every dollar is a government with the constitutional power to tax, borrow on the credit of the United States, and coin money. Those legal powers and the institutions that exercise them anchor the system that the dollar runs on. People who study the economy sometimes call it exorbitant privilege, tied to the economic scale of security and alliance. Because the real question isn't what backs the US dollar, what's the dollar worth, it's what power and institutions uphold the system that gives the US dollar global reach. So I'm going to give you all a quick history here. The post-war system pegged the US dollar to gold, but in 1971, the US ended gold convertibility and moved the US currency to a fiat system. That's value backed by law and institutions, not metal. So what backs the US dollar now? On paper, it's federal obligations that rest on the full faith and credit of the United States. In other words, the US dollar is backed by good faith in your government. It's also shorthand for Congress's power to tax, borrow, and coin money. In practice, there are three pillars that sustain today's dollar. For number one, you have the world's leading economy and innovation. Number two, you have deep, liquid, and rule of law financial markets. Number three, capacity to uphold a rules-based economic order through lawful economic tools and credible security and alliance networks. It's that third pillar that many people often overlook, the enforcement and security capacity that helps the international system function predictably. You see, a currency doesn't need shiny metal locked up in some vault somewhere. What it needs is a productive capacity and economic strength. What else it needs is financial stability and the legal authority to tax, borrow, coin money, and make currency a legal tender. It needs credibility and demand for safe assets with a strong national security. And finally, what it needs last is the rule of law and institutions that enforce the rules, financially and when needed, physically to keep the trade routes open. There are four requirements of a dominant currency. The first requirement is big, dynamic economy. Second, strong institutions and the rule of law. Third, open, stable, liquid markets. Fourth, the ability to enforce the system's rules. Sanctions coordination, regulatory reach, and credible security guarantees with the nation's allies. Legal tender means Congress can designate U.S. currency as valid for payments of debts. The Supreme Court has upheld that authority. States, however, cannot coin money. That's why you never see states like Texas, Alabama, Tennessee. They don't have their own currency. So no, the military doesn't back every single dollar, but the rules-based system that the dollar depends on is underpinned by federal law, legal tender, contracts, and courts, and by governments and alliances that keep the global economic system relatively stable. Nuclear deterrence does not hold back the dollar. It keeps great power conflict less likely, supporting the stability reserve currencies benefit from. It takes alliances and maritime stability. These tools work because there's a worldwide demand for dollars and access to U.S. financial markets. Sanctions can require the blocking or freezing of property interests under U.S. jurisdiction and restrict transactions. These effects that are amplified often through coordination with allies. After Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, the United States and allies imposed extensive economic sanctions. Among other steps, there were measures that immobilized Russia's central bank and their reserves under relevant jurisdictions and limited access to the dollar funding channels. A large share of official reserves in cross-border finance is dollar dominated. That reflects liquidity, depth, and the credibility of United States institutions, patterns reinforced by alliances and security ties. China aims to expand their currency's global rule, But reserve currency status requires openness to capital flows, deep trust, strong legal protections, and extensive, safe assets, plus geopolitical alignment that reduces the risk of sanctions. If the U.S. economic, institutional, or enforcement capacity were to weaken, or if alliances began to fray, change is likely to be very gradual. More regional invoicing, more bilateral non dollar trade, and upward pressure on U.S. borrowing costs. Historically, such transactions take years. The U.S. military does not back the dollar the way that gold once did, but lawful enforcement, deep markets, incredible security, and alliance networks help uphold the rules based order that the U.S. dollar relies on. The dollar is a legal and economic contract. It's a bet on American productivity, institutions, the rule of law, and the constitutional powers to coin money, regulate its value, and maintain legal tender. As long as those pillars remain credible, the contract holds. Some of you may have seen a recent interview where President Trump had said that he has been talking to leaders of other countries and told some that if you do not keep the United States dollar as reserve currency, he's going to put a 100% tariff on that country. So, politics aside, I believe it's very safe to say that the US dollar will continue to be the world's currency and remain a very powerful currency. If you want more breakdowns of how history, law, money, and power actually work, go ahead and hit like and subscribe, okay? This is the Harold Robinson analysis. Watch, think, question, understand. There's going to be a lot more videos to come, and you don't want to miss any of them.